Hello everyone, Miss Carrie here from Miss Carrie's Creations. Today I'm going to share 3 lovely spring cards and show you how to paint over embossed images with reinkers. I have on my desk the April paper pad collection from Not Too Shabby. These 2 patterns are perfect for spring. Beautiful Wings is filled with fanciful designs and watercolor images. This 6x6 pack also has some cut-aparts in it that you can use. The paper pad I'm using today is called Blooms of Spring. These designs are lovely florals and solids. I like the softer hues in here with the addition of white. You can get both of these paper pads with the monthly paper pad subscription in the Not Too Shabby shop. Here are the supplies I'm going to be using on my cards today. I've already selected the patterns from the Blooms of Spring paper pad. I will also be using this stamp set with a large floral design on my spring cards. I have gathered some embossing powders, embossing ink, an anti-static brush, and a heat tool. We're going to be heat embossing the floral image on solid colors as we create our cards. Once those are heat embossed, I'm going to show you how easy it is to paint these images with Distress Oxide reinkers. As I create the projects, I'll bring in a few more items to the designs, and I'll make sure to list those in the supply list below, next to the link to the Paper Pad Club. I'm going to start by trimming down my pattern papers. I'm going to cut these down to 5.5 inches. Then cut that down to 4 1/4. I'm keeping both of these cuts so that I can use them on my cards. The florals on these patterns are so pretty and make me wish that the weather here was warmer. This week we are having another snowstorm and my little tulip leaves are not very happy. This is how each of the card fronts are going to look once they're assembled together. Before we adhere these in place, I want to add a little heat embossing to those solid patterns. I am using a stamping platform to stamp these images, and I've placed some paper down onto my foam mat to prevent it from getting filled with ink. I'm going to prep the paper with some anti-static powder. This brush is used to reduce the static on the paper, and it prevents your powder from going where you don't want it to. I'm going to use embossing ink to stamp a partial floral image onto each of these solid pieces. Then I will sprinkle it with powder and set it aside. Now that all 3 of these are ready to be heat set, I'm going to bring in my heat tool and heat that powder from underneath the paper. You can see it melt as I move my tool across the image. Now you don't want to overheat this or you're going to lose that lovely raised design. The stamping and embossing is going to be done in 2 stages. I want the stamped image to go all the way across the paper, but I didn't have a stamping block large enough for my stamp. So I'm going to have to first stamp all 3 papers, then heat set the powder, and then I'll come back and stamp the remaining part of the image. You don't want to overheat this or you're going to lose that raised design. The white powder really stands out on the purple, doesn't it? I love the way this looks. I'm going to repeat this process with the copper. Again, I'm heating it from below the paper and moving my way across the card. As the powder sets, you're going to see it become shiny. Just make sure that you don't overheat it. I'm going to go off camera and finish these up, and then I'll show you what these designs look like. Here are all 3 heat embossed images. Aren't these pretty? Now at this point you can adhere these patterns in place, add a sentiment, and call these complete. But you know that I always like to show you how to amp up your cards. Today we're going to be painting these with Distress Oxide inks. I'm going to start with spun sugar, and I'm painting this over the petals of the flowers. Now you're going to see that the ink reacts with the paper and creates more of a chalky finish. The paper pads from Not Too Shabby have a glossy coating on them, which prevents this ink from soaking in right away. So you get this awesome effect when you add Distress Oxide ink. If you're not a painter or can't stay in the lines, don't fret. With this technique, you're letting that ink pool onto the image, and the embossing powder works almost like a little dam. It also resists the ink. So if you get a little bit of your ink on the heat set image, it's going to repel the ink and you won't be able to tell that you went outside the lines. Now I have skipped ahead here so that you can see what this looks like with the flowers filled in. That tone on tone is so pretty with a chalk finish. I'm going to shade in the purple images just like I did on the previous card, but this time I'm using a little lighter ink and I'm going to fill everything in. I'm using milled lavender to quickly paint all the images. My paintbrush is a simple watercolor brush that I have in my craft room. The watercolor brushes tend to have a softer bristle that holds the ink, and I find them easier to paint with. The second panel is now complete. I'm going to bring in the pink card front so that you can see the difference between the two. The tone on tone with only the flowers shaded is a very subtle design, while the one with the lighter shade of lavender with white heat embossing is much bolder. You can choose either technique or try both and see which one you prefer. Alright, let me show you how I'm going to paint this third card. I want this one to have a more rustic look, so I'm going to paint the flowers with tea dye ink. I didn't have a reinker for this one, so I'm just going to smush my ink pad onto the glass board and spray a little water on it to liquefy it. Again, I'm going to paint in the images. This embossing powder is a copper color, and I love how it pairs so beautifully with the tan ink. As I finish painting these last few images, I would love it if you tap that subscribe button and let me know that you're new here. If you've been here for a while, let me know that you're enjoying today's video by tapping that thumbs up or with a comment below. Before I set this one aside to dry, I'm going to add a few splatters. And not only are these going to add to the rustic feel of the card, but they're also going to help hide where I got a little messy and went outside the lines. Splatters and embellishments are great for hiding mistakes. Alright, let's assemble these three cards. I'm going to start with that pretty pink one. I've added the pattern paper onto the left side and I'm adding some ribbon in between the two. I like to use double-sided tape to adhere my ribbon in place, and I just tuck the ends behind my card panel. Near the top of the card, I'm going to add a little decorative knot. I'm going to attach this in place with a glue dot, and then I'm going to add a sentiment near the base of the card. You could also stamp a sentiment onto some paper and attach it here if you wished. For the next card, we have a glorious purple color. This is going to be a horizontal card, so I've added the pattern paper at the top and I'm adding some ribbon in between the two. Once that little decorative knot is in place, I can add a sentiment on the lower right side. I chose to use die cut sentiments backed with vellum on each of these cards to keep it very simple today. Alright, here is that final card. Doesn't that copper and tan look so pretty with that daisy pattern? I'm using tan ribbon for this one, and I'm going to add another decorative knot at the top. Now, if you're like me and prefer to add your knots separately, you can pinch and tuck that flat ribbon around your double-sided tape and make it look like it bunched under the knot. This gives it the illusion that the knot was tied onto the card. Let's take a look one more time at all three cards we created today. I did add a few little enamel dots to these. You could also add some stitching, sequins, pearls, or gems. The designs are very simple and easy to create with pattern paper and heat embossed images. But adding that little bit of color with Distress Oxide ink added so much more to these designs. Each of these cards has a lovely spring feel with printed and stamped florals and can be altered to fit just about any occasion. I hope this project inspired you to try something new. If you're one who likes to pin photos to inspiration boards, I have added still shots to my website and in the Not Too Shabby Friends Facebook group for you to use. Thank you again for joining me for another paper crafting project. If you have any questions, feel free to leave me a comment. I hope that you have a wonderful week, and I can't wait to see what you create.